She slapped me on the sidewalk, in the middle of the day, right in front of the ATM, all for $200. My son just sat in the car and looked away. That was the precise moment I knew I was dead to them. They thought they were draining a tiny savings account. They had no idea what they really just unleashed. My name is Margaret. I am 62 years old, a retired librarian, and for the past year, a widow. I was standing in the weak November sunlight of Denver, Colorado, in front of a bank ATM, trying to withdraw the last $200 from my savings account. The air was thin and cold, and the chill was already seeping into my bones. But it was nothing compared to the coldness that had become my life. A sleek, unnecessarily large black SUV pulled up to the curb behind me, its engine humming aggressively. I did not need to turn around to know who it was. My daughter-in-law, Brenda, who was 35, and my son, Mark, 38. Brenda, a self-proclaimed lifestyle consultant, was always in desperate need of money. Mark, my son, just sat in the driver's seat, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone. The passenger door slammed. I heard the sharp click-clack of her designer heels on the pavement approaching me. "What is taking so long?" Brenda snapped. Her voice was like ice. "I need that deposit money for the spa trip." My hands trembled as I clutched my debit card. "Brenda, there is not much left," I whispered, trying to shield the screen with my body. "I only have this much." "You are lying," she hissed, stepping closer. I could smell her expensive perfume, a scent that always seemed to choke me. "There is no way Arthur left you with nothing. He must have left you more than that." I flinched, instinctively trying to cover the keypad as I attempted to cancel the transaction. I just wanted to leave. But Brenda was faster. She lost what little control she had. "Enter your PIN right now," she screamed. And then she slapped me. It was not a shove. It was a full, open-handed strike across my left cheek. The force of it sent my glasses flying from my face, skittering across the concrete. I stumbled backward, my hip striking the cold metal of the ATM. The world blurred. Pain exploded on my face, sharp and stinging. But it was the humiliation that knocked the breath from my lungs. My first, desperate instinct was to look for my son. I squinted toward the SUV, my heart pounding a frantic plea. "Mark." He looked up. Our eyes met for a single, terrible fraction of a second. I saw him register the scene. I saw him see his wife standing over me, his mother clutching her face. And then, slowly, deliberately, Mark turned his head away. He looked back down at his phone, as if he were merely waiting for a red light to change, as if nothing had happened. That was the moment the pain in my cheek went numb. Brenda, fueled by her rage, ripped the debit card from my trembling fingers. "Give me that." She shoved me aside, and I nearly fell to the ground. She already knew the PIN. She must have watched me enter it before, peering over my shoulder in our home. She jammed the card into the slot, her fingers punching the keys with practiced ease. She withdrew the full $200, but she was not finished. After the machine spit out the cash, which she quickly stuffed into her purse, she pulled the card out. She looked at it with pure contempt. Then, she looked at me. She threw the card down onto the sidewalk, directly into a small, greasy puddle of melted snow and dirt. "Useless," she hissed. She was not talking to the card. She turned and marched back to the SUV, her heels clicking an angry rhythm. The door slammed shut, and the vehicle sped away from the curb, leaving me in its exhaust fumes. I stood there, frozen. My cheek was a throbbing, hot map of pain and shame. My glasses lay shattered a few feet away. I stared at the ATM screen, which had gone dark. In its black, reflective surface, I saw a distorted image of myself, an old woman, dishevelled, humiliated, and utterly alone on a cold Denver sidewalk. The ride back to the penthouse was silent. I sat in the back seat, the stinging on my cheek a dull throb, my broken glasses digging into my palm. Brenda was in the front, scrolling through her phone, probably admiring her new spa package. Mark just drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the traffic ahead. No one spoke. The silence in the car was as loud and violent as the slap had been. It had not always been this way. Only a year ago. My life was small, but it was mine. Then Arthur died. It was a sudden, massive heart attack on a Tuesday morning. One moment he was complaining about the stock market report. The next he was gone. Arthur was a good man, a quiet man. He handled all our finances, our investments, our future. I was the librarian. I handled the books and the quiet order of our home. I trusted him completely. Perhaps that was my first mistake. After the funeral, when I was still drowning in the fog of fresh grief, Mark and Brenda descended. They were so concerned, so loving. "Mum, you cannot be alone in this big house," Mark had said, his arm around my shoulder. "It is too much for you." Brenda had chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "We want you to come live with us, in the penthouse. We can take care of you. You will not have to worry about a thing." So I sold my house, the one Arthur and I had lived in for 30 years. I sold the furniture, the garden tools, the memories. I packed what was left into 2 suitcases and moved into their glass and steel palace in the sky. The reality of being taken care of became clear within 48 hours. I was not a mother. I was staff. The penthouse was stunning, all white marble and floor-to-ceiling windows, but it was cold, sterile. My role was to keep it that way. I cooked. I cleaned. I dusted their minimalist shelves and polished their chrome fixtures. I even walked their neurotic, purebred dog, a creature that seemed to despise me as much as its owners did. Brenda, meanwhile, spent her days on her laptop, consulting on her lifestyle blog, which seemed to consist entirely of complaining about deliveries and taking pictures of her expensive purchases. The Mark who lived in that penthouse was not the son I had raised. My boy, the one who used to bring me wildflowers from the yard, was gone. This Mark was a hollow man, his spine removed and replaced by Brenda's ambition. He worked obsessively long hours at a tech firm called Viridian Dynamics, clearly desperate to finance the extravagant life Brenda demanded. He left before sunrise and returned long after I had cooked and cleaned up the dinner Brenda barely touched. I tried to excuse him. "He is stressed," I would tell myself, scrubbing a pot. "He has so much pressure at work." But deep down, I saw the truth. He was terrified of his wife. He was terrified of her anger, her moods, her endless, bottomless needs. It was easier for him to ignore me, to let me become a ghost in his home, than to stand up to her. Brenda's contempt was a constant, low-level hum. At first, it was just words. I was senile when I misplaced the television remote. I was a burden when I asked if Mark could drive me to a doctor's appointment. She criticized my cooking, my cleaning, the way I folded the laundry. Then, the accidents started. A mug of scalding hot coffee slipped from her hand, splashing across my forearm. I had to treat the burn myself. A heavy interior door slipped from her grasp, slamming shut on my hand, crushing my fingers. I hid the bruising under long sleeves. Each time, she would offer a breezy "oops" without ever making eye contact. Mark, if he was even there, would just flinch and say nothing. The final illusion of my place in their home shattered last month. I had a small, antique jewellery box that had belonged to my own mother. It held a few pieces my grandmother's locket, a pair of pearl earrings Arthur had given me for our 20th anniversary. I had kept it tucked away in my drawer. One day, I noticed it was gone. I searched the entire guest room, my panic rising. I finally found it. Empty. Hidden under a pile of towels in the back of Brenda's cavernous walk-in closet. That same evening, I confronted her. She was trying on a new, ridiculously expensive designer handbag. "Brenda," I said, my voice shaking. "My jewelry box. It was empty." She did not even turn around, just admired her reflection in the mirror. "Oh, that it was just a bunch of old junk. I sold it. This bag was almost $2,000. You know." I looked at Mark, who was standing in the doorway, loosening his tie. "Mark," I pleaded. "She sold my mother's locket." He sighed, the sound of pure exhaustion. He would not look at me. He just looked at his wife. "Mom," he said, his voice flat. "It is just old stuff. Please, do not upset Brenda. She had a hard day." That was the end. I knew then that I had no son. I was just a resource to be drained, an inconvenience to be managed. And as I sat in the back of their SUV, my cheek blazing, my card lying in a filthy puddle, I understood that the draining was finally complete. I had nothing left for them to take. When we arrived back at the penthouse, I was still in a state of shock, clutching my broken glasses in one hand, my cheek a dull, throbbing ache. The elevator opened directly into the foyer, and I stepped out onto the cold marble floor. They were waiting for me, Brenda and Mark. They stood side by side, a solid, unmoving wall of judgment. And there, by the massive front door, were my 2 suitcases, the ones I had arrived with a year ago, filled with the last remnants of my old life. They were packed. Brenda crossed her arms, a look of grim triumph on her face. "We cannot live with a toxic person like you anymore," she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. "You are actively trying to destroy our marriage." The accusation was so bizarre, so completely untethered from reality, that I could only stare. "Toxic," I whispered. "Brenda, I just cleaned the kitchen." I looked at my son, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Mark, what is she talking about, Mark? Please." He would not look at me. He just stared at a spot on the pristine white wall just past my shoulder. "Mum," he said, and the voice that came out was not his. It was a flat, rehearsed monotone. "This is for the best. It is just not working out. You need your own space." "My own space," I repeated, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "Mark, she just hit me. On the street. You saw her." He flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. "Brenda is under a lot of stress," he mumbled, "and you keep provoking her. We think it is better if you just go." There was no arguing. There was no discussion. This was a verdict that had been decided long before I stepped out of the car. This was not a disagreement. It was an expulsion. They drove me, not to a hotel, not to a friend's house. We drove out of the glittering center of Denver, past the suburbs, to the long, bleak stretch of highway on the city's outskirts. They pulled into the cracked parking lot of a grim, two-story motel called the Alpine View, though the only view was of a gas station and the highway. Mark got my 2 suitcases from the trunk. He walked me to the door of room 114, his head down the entire time. He pressed the room key into my hand. Then, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small roll of cash. He pushed it into my other hand. I counted it later. It was $500. A final, pathetic gesture of generosity to wash his hands of me. "This will help you get by," he said, still avoiding my eyes. "I will call. I will call when things settle down, when things are better." I looked at the peeling paint on the motel door, then at my son's face, a mask of cowardice I no longer recognized. I knew, with chilling certainty, that he would never call. This was not a temporary measure. This was goodbye. He turned and walked back to the car, where Brenda sat impatiently in the passenger seat. He got in, and they drove away without a backward glance. The motel room smelled of stale cigarettes, bleach, and old sorrow. I sat on the edge of the lumpy bed for hours, the $500 still clutched in my fist. That money, which was meant to help me get by, disappeared with horrifying speed. The room cost $90 a night. I bought pre-packaged sandwiches from the gas station next door. Within 5 days, the money was almost gone. I tried calling Mark. Every single time, it went straight to his voicemail. "Mark, please," I whispered into the phone, my voice cracking. "Please. I do not understand what I did. I am at the motel. Please just call me." I sent him text messages. "I am almost out of money. Please talk to me." The phone showed that he had read them. He saw my words, and he did nothing. On the last day, the motel manager slipped a note under my door. Checkout was at 11 a.m., or they would call the police to have me removed for trespassing. I had $10 left. I was frantic. I called Mark's number one last time, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely press the screen. I expected the voicemail, but this time, it rang. Once. Twice. Then, she picked up. "Hello?" Brenda's voice was bright and cheerful. "Brenda," I gasped, a wave of desperate, foolish relief washing over me. "Oh, thank God. Please, I need to talk to Mark. The motel. They are kicking me out. I have nowhere to go." There was a short pause. Then I heard it. A low, cruel laugh. "Oh my God," she said, her voice dripping with amusement. "You are still alive?" The words struck me silent. "Listen, you old hag," she snapped, her voice suddenly turning to ice. "Mark blocked your number. He is sick of you. I only unblocked it to see if you had finally gotten the hint. Stop calling us." I heard Mark's muffled voice in the background. "Babe, who is that?" "No one," Brenda replied, her voice loud and clear for me to hear. "Just a wrong number. We are going to be late for our flight to Aspen." The line clicked. She had hung up. I sat on the edge of the bed, the dead phone in my hand, listening to the sound of the highway outside. I was 62 years old, and I was homeless. At 11 a.m. on the dot, there was a heavy knock on the motel room door. It was not a request. It was a command. The manager, a large man with a weary face, did not even speak. He just pointed at the parking lot. I picked up my 2 suitcases. They felt heavier now, weighted with a new, profound despair. I stepped out of the room, and he immediately went inside, presumably to make sure I had not stolen the thin towels. The door clicked shut behind me. I was on the street. The wind was sharp, carrying the first real bite of the coming Denver winter. It whipped my hair across my face, the same face that still ached from Brenda's hand. I had nowhere to go. I had no one to call. I started to walk, pulling my luggage behind me. The little plastic wheels of the suitcases rumbled on the uneven sidewalk, a pathetic, lonely sound. I walked for hours, just to keep warm, with no destination in mind. I saw a sign for a women's shelter and went inside, my shame a physical weight in my stomach. The place was warm and smelled of boiled vegetables and disinfectant. It was overflowing. A kind woman with tired eyes shook her head before I even spoke. "We are full to capacity. Honey, bunks are all taken. I can give you a hot meal, but I cannot give you a bed." I ate the soup she gave me. It was thin, but it was hot. It was the first warmth I had felt all day. I thanked her and left. I found myself walking downtown, and then I saw it. The Denver Public Library. My old life. The place I had worked for 40 years. I had been a senior librarian, respected, knowledgeable. Now, I walked in with my 2 suitcases, my hair matted, my coat stained from the motel. I was just another homeless person seeking refuge from the cold. I pushed my suitcases into a corner of the main reading room and sat down. No one recognized me. Or if they did, they pretended not to. I was invisible. I sat there all day, surrounded by the books that had been my life's work. They were my only comfort, the silent, loyal friends who asked for nothing. I would read the same page over and over, my mind unable to process the words, just soaking in the quiet and the warmth. But the library closed at 8 p.m. A polite announcement came over the speakers, and the lights began to dim. The sense of panic returned, cold and sharp. I had to go back out into the night. I found a bus stop with a small, 3-sided shelter. I pushed my suitcases against the back wall, sat down on the hard plastic bench, and tried to make myself as small as possible. I pulled my coat tight, tucking my chin into the collar. I watched people come and go, their faces bright with purpose as they headed home. I was invisible to them, too, just a lump in the shadows. The cold was brutal. It seeped up from the concrete, through the thin soles of my shoes, into my bones. But the shame was worse. The shame was a physical illness, a nausea that rolled in my stomach. I was 62 years old. I had a master's degree. I had raised a son, and I was sleeping at a bus stop. I had become one of the women I used to see from my car, the ones I would pity and then, to my shame, quickly forget. Sometime after midnight, a car pulled up. A security guard, not a police officer, got out. He had a kind face. He approached me slowly. "Ma'am," he said, his voice soft. "I am sorry, but you cannot stay here. It is not safe." I just nodded, my eyes filling with tears I refused to let fall. "I have nowhere else," I whispered. He sighed, a puff of white in the frigid air. "I know. It is tough out here." He paused, thinking. "Look, I know a public storage facility a few blocks from here. They often keep their gates open late for clients. It is not much, but it is out of the wind. They might not bother you for a few hours." His words pierced through the fog of my despair. Storage. Suddenly, I was not at the bus stop. I was in my old kitchen, years ago. Arthur was laughing, jingling a set of keys. "I am heading to my secret office," he would say. "My escape pod." I always thought it was a joke, that he just went to a coffee shop. But I remembered the key. It was a strange, industrial-looking key, and he had put a spare one on my own keychain, the one right here in my coat pocket. "Just in case," he had said. "You ever need to find my secret stash of comics?" My fingers fumbled inside my pocket, past the wadded-up tissues. I felt the cold, familiar ring of my keys. And there, among them, I felt its distinct, rectangular shape, the storage key. I looked up at the guard. "Thank you," I said, my voice hoarse. "Can you tell me where that storage facility is?" The sun rose grey and weak, offering no heat, only a thin light that exposed the grime of the city. I had huddled near the gate of the storage facility as the guard suggested, avoiding the main wind. But I was frozen to the core. I fumbled in my pocket for the last of the cash Mark had given me. $10 and some change. I counted out the bus fare, my fingers too numb to separate the coins easily. I used the remaining handful of dollars to buy a stale pastry from a convenience store. It was the first thing I had eaten in nearly 24 hours. I pulled my 2 suitcases onto the first bus of the morning, earning a heavy sigh from the driver. I ignored him. I ignored the stares of the other passengers. My entire world had shrunk to the single, cold piece of metal in my coat pocket. The address on the key tag was in an industrial area I barely recognized. The bus let me off on a wide, wind-swept street, lined with identical-looking corrugated metal buildings. Security self-storage. The place looked deserted, the paint peeling. I dragged my suitcases over the cracked asphalt, searching for the right building. Row C. I found it. A long, anonymous block of metal doors. I walked down the row until I found the unit number 31. It was an old, roll-up door, rust creeping at the edges. My heart hammered against my ribs. What if it was just full of old Christmas decorations? What if it was empty? A relic of a joke I never understood. My hands were shaking so violently from the cold and adrenaline that I struggled to fit the key into the lock. It was stiff from disuse. I put my shoulder against the cold metal, using my body weight to turn the key. There was a loud, scraping crack that echoed in the morning silence. The heavy lock popped open. I grabbed the handle and pulled. The door screeched in protest, loud enough to make me wince, before it slowly rolled up, revealing the darkness inside. The air that wafted out was not the musty smell of old clothes and forgotten furniture. It smelled of wood polish, old paper, and the faint, familiar scent of Arthur's aftershave. I fumbled along the inside wall, my fingers finding a simple pull cord. A single bare bulb flickered to life, illuminating the small, windowless space. It was not a storage unit. It was an office. It was small, but meticulously organized. Against the far wall stood a heavy, 4-drawer metal filing cabinet. A simple wooden desk sat in the center, with a sturdy office chair behind it. There were no cobwebs, no dust. Someone had been maintaining this place. On the corner of the desk, there was only one personal item, a framed photograph of Arthur and me, taken on our honeymoon nearly 40 years ago. We were young, impossibly young, squinting happily into the sun. I walked toward the desk, my fingers tracing the outline of the frame. Why would he hide this? I tried the desk drawers. They were unlocked, but held only pens, paper clips, and blank legal pads. I turned my attention to the filing cabinet. It was the center of the room, the center of this secret. I pulled on the top drawer. Locked. I tried all four. All locked tight. I scanned the room again. No key on the desk. Not on the walls. I went back to the desk, running my hand along the underside, feeling the rough, unfinished wood. My fingers brushed against a small piece of tape. Stuck to the bottom of the main drawer, hidden from view, was a small, silver key. My breath caught. I pulled the key free and slid it into the lock at the top of the filing cabinet. It turned with a smooth, oiled click. I pulled the top drawer open. I expected to see old tax forms, maybe the deed to the house I had already sold. But the files were pristine, organized with a precision that was pure Arthur. The tabs were not labeled taxes or insurance. They were labeled bonds, stocks, offshore holdings. I felt a wave of dizziness. This was wrong. Arthur was a salaried accountant. We lived comfortably, but not like this. I pulled open the second drawer. More folders. Commercial real estate, Cherry Creek. Commercial real estate, the Parkview building. Commercial real estate, Lodo district. My mind flashed to the penthouse. The Parkview, Mark and Brenda's building. At the very front of the top drawer, set apart from the files, was a thick, yellow manila envelope. My name was written on the front in Arthur's familiar, steady handwriting. For Margaret, it read. Only open when you truly need to. I sank into the desk chair, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. I thought of the motel, the bus stop, the slap. I truly need to, I whispered. I tore the envelope open. Inside was a long, handwritten letter on several pages of yellow legal paper and a single, heavy-stock business card. I unfolded the letter. My dearest Margaret, it began. If you are reading this, I am gone, and you are in the precise trouble I always feared. Please forgive me for the secrets. I was not just an accountant. Maggie. It started as a small side investment, a way to build a real nest egg. But I was good at it. I was a silent partner in real estate. A very, very successful one. I had to read the next lines 3 times before the words would make sense. He had not left me with a small pension. He had left me everything. He had spent the last 20 years building an empire, all of it structured through trusts and holding companies designed to be invisible, all of it listing me as the sole owner. He detailed it the buildings, the stock portfolios. It was not a small retirement. It was an estate worth tens of millions of dollars. I kept it hidden to protect you, he wrote. I saw Mark change when he met Brenda. I saw her hunger, and I saw his weakness for her. I knew if they thought you had money, they would never stop until they had bled you dry. I set this up so they could never touch it. Only you. The penthouse they live in. It is yours, Maggie. The whole building is yours. My eyes blurred with tears. He had seen it. He had seen it all. And he had protected me. Even from the grave. I read the last line, a sentence that seemed to burn itself into my brain. You are stronger than you think. You were always the smarter one. Never let anyone bully you. Maggie. Not even our son. When you are ready, contact Elias Thorne. He knows everything. He is the only person I trust. I looked down. The business card. Elias Thorne. Attorney at law. Real estate and trust. I left my suitcases in the locked storage unit. It was the only home I had. I walked out of the facility, past the bus stop, and to the convenience store where I had bought the pastry. There was a payphone by the door, gritty and covered in graffiti. I picked up the receiver, the cold plastic smelling of stale alcohol, and used the last of my change to dial the number on Elias Thorne's card. It rang only once. A man's voice answered. Not a secretary, but the man himself. His voice was calm, clear, and projected a quiet, effortless authority. Thorne? My name is Margaret. I started, my own voice a hoarse whisper. My husband was Arthur. Arthur? Mrs. Wallace. He interrupted gently, using my maiden name, a name I had not heard in 40 years. We have been expecting your call. Arthur left very specific instructions. Where are you? I told him the address of the storage facility. Do not move, he said. A car will be with you in 10 minutes. The line clicked. I stood by the curb, a disheveled woman in a dirty coat, my hair matted, my cheek still bruised, my broken glasses in my pocket. Exactly 10 minutes later, a flawless, gleaming black sedan, the kind that ferries presidents and billionaires, glided to a stop in front of me. The back door opened, and a driver in a dark suit stepped out. He did not blink. He did not judge my appearance. He simply said, Mrs. Wallace, Mr. Thorne sent me. He took my elbow gently and helped me into the plush leather interior. The car moved silently through the city, leaving the industrial grime behind and ascending into the heart of downtown's financial district. We pulled into a private garage beneath a tower of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the sky. The elevator was silent and swift, taking us to the very top floor. The doors opened onto a reception area that was larger than my entire sold-off house. It was all glass, light, and expensive art. A moment later, Elias Thorne emerged from an office. He was perhaps in his late 60s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything. He was the physical embodiment of the power his voice had promised. He did not offer me a handshake I was too filthy to accept. He simply inclined his head. Mrs. Wallace, I am Elias Thorne. I am so very sorry for the circumstances that led you to me. Arthur was a brilliant man, and my dearest friend. He led me into his office. One entire wall was a sheet of glass overlooking the city of Denver. I could see everything. The mountains in the distance, the grid of the city, and across town. I could even make out the distinct shape of the Parkview building. Arthur was not just an accountant, Thorne began, sitting behind a massive, uncluttered desk. He was, for all intents and purposes, a financial ghost. He built an empire of commercial real estate and equities, and he structured it so that his name appeared on nothing, while your name, Margaret Wallace, was on everything. You are not just wealthy. You are one of the largest private real estate owners in this city. He explained it all. The holding companies, the trusts, the layers of legal protection Arthur had built. He was deeply worried, Thorne said, his voice softening. He saw the influence your daughter-in-law had on Mark. He saw her appetites. He set this entire structure in place specifically to give you absolute, undeniable control. He knew that if they believed you were a poor widow, they would show their true colours. He wanted you to see them for what they were before you had the power to act. My throat was dry. He saw it all. He did. Thorne confirmed. He just hoped you would never have to use these tools. I looked out the window, my eyes fixed on the distant shape of the penthouse. "The Parkview building," I said. "Mark and Brenda. They live there." A thin, cold smile touched the corners of Elias Thorne's mouth. "Ah, yes. The Parkview. One of your most valuable assets. In fact, I've reviewed the records. They are living there based on a verbal family arrangement that Arthur, very cleverly, never formalized. There is no lease. There is no contract. Legally speaking, Mrs. Wallace. They are tenants at will." Tenants. The word hung in the air. Not family. Not even guests. Tenants. I continued to stare at the building. The place I had scrubbed on my hands and knees. The place I had been thrown out of. The image of Mark turning away from me at the ATM, of Brenda's mocking laugh over the phone, burned in my mind. My numbness was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. "How long do they have?" I asked. "Well," Thorne said, leaning forward slightly. "Given the lack of any formal agreement, Colorado law is quite straightforward. We can serve them with a 21-day notice to quit. They would be out before Christmas." He paused, adjusting a cufflink. "Or we could do something else." I finally turned away from the window and met his gaze. "What else?" Elias Thorne's smile remained, but it was cold. "The something else is that we stop treating this as a family dispute and start treating it as what it is, a business transaction." He opened a desk drawer and slid a thin, impossibly heavy black card across the polished wood. It was an American Express black card. My name, Margaret Wallace, was already embossed on it. "Your liquidity is, for all intents and purposes, limitless, Mrs. Wallace," he said. "The first step is to stop looking like a victim. Go to the Brown Palace. Get the presidential suite. I have already made the call. The car is waiting. We will begin our work this afternoon." I took the card. The drive to the Brown Palace was a blur. When I walked in, dragging the grime of the street, the concierge did not blink. He simply smiled warmly. "Welcome, Mrs. Wallace. We have the presidential suite ready for you." The suite was not a room. It was an apartment, larger than my old house, filled with dark wood, rich fabrics, and the quiet hum of old money. The bathroom was a chamber of Italian marble. I locked the door, turned on the taps of the enormous soaking tub, and watched it fill with steaming water. I undressed, dropping the filthy clothes I had been wearing for days onto the floor. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. I saw the bruise on my cheek, the dirt under my fingernails, the grey, matted hair of a homeless woman. I stepped into the water. It was scalding hot, but I welcomed it. I took a bar of expensive, lemon-scented soap and began to scrub. I scrubbed my skin until it was raw, watching the dirt and grime of the bus stop, the motel, and the sidewalk pool at the bottom of the tub. I was not just washing away the filth. I was washing away the humiliation. I was washing away the shame. I was washing away the weak, trembling woman who had pleaded with her son. I submerged my head, holding my breath until my lungs burned. And when I came up, the water sluicing from my face, Margaret was gone. I called the front desk and requested the services of the best salon in Denver. They sent a team to my suite. For 3 hours. They worked. They cut my grey, lifeless hair into a sharp, elegant bob, colouring it a sophisticated silver that looked intentional, not neglected. They did my nails. They brought in racks of clothing from high-end boutiques. I did not choose the cardigans of a retiree. I chose steel grey cashmere suits, sharp-shouldered blouses, and black leather shoes with a low, practical, and powerful heel. I purchased new glasses, not the soft, wire-rimmed ones Brenda had broken, but a pair of modern, black designer frames that gave my eyes a look of intense, analytical focus. When they were finished, the woman in the mirror was a stranger. She was tall, poised, and radiated an aura of cold, untouchable authority. I called Elias Thorne. "I am ready," I said. "Good," he replied. "From this moment, you are no longer Margaret, the mother. You are Mrs. Wallace, the principal owner. Everyone, including me, will refer to you as such. It is important for what comes next." "Understood," I said. For the next week, the presidential suite became my war room. Thorne arrived every morning with binders, financials, and legal documents. We formed a new limited liability company, a shell corporation to act as the public-facing entity for all my holdings. Arthur had suggested the name in his letter, a final, private joke. We called it Summit Ridge Properties. Thorne was my guide, but I was a fast student. The meticulous, detail-oriented mind that had made me a successful librarian was perfectly suited to dissecting legal contracts and financial statements. I cross-referenced. I read footnotes. I absorbed decades of complex business dealings. I learned my empire. On the third day, Thorne brought the file for the Parkview building. "As I said, they have no lease," he explained, "which gives us a clear path. But I have been looking at the building's expense accounts, and I found something disturbing." He opened a thick ledger and pointed to a line item. Arthur had a compliant building manager, a man who is now retired. He left instructions that his family in the penthouse was to be accommodated. "Accommodated?" I asked, my new glasses perched on my nose. "Brenda and Mark," Thorne said, his face grim, interpreted accommodated rather broadly. They were not just living rent-free. They were billing the building. I scanned the charges. My blood, which I thought had turned to ice, began to boil. It was not just utilities. It was their cable, their high-speed internet, their $500 a week housekeeping service. It was room service from the restaurant downstairs. It was their membership dues at the adjacent country club. It was even, I saw, the monthly lease payment on Brenda's black SUV. They had convinced the old manager that these were all owner's expenses to be paid from the building's operational fund. They had not just taken my home. They had not just taken my son. They had not just slapped me and thrown me on the street. They had been actively, systematically, and gleefully embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from me, from the very company I owned, all while I was in the next room scrubbing their floors. The first official communication from Summit Ridge Properties was not an eviction notice. That would have been too merciful. It was a simple, legally binding invoice, delivered by a certified courier to the penthouse. I sat in Thorne's office as we tracked the delivery confirmation online. "Signed for by B. Wallace." Thorne read aloud, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. I imagined her tearing open the professional envelope, expecting perhaps an invitation or a notice about the elevator maintenance. Instead, she would have found a meticulously itemized bill. This was not a mistake. It was an accounting. We had calculated 5 years of retroactive market rate rent for the penthouse. We had itemized every single charge they had billed to the building's accounts, the housekeeping, the club memberships, the dinners, the spa days, the internet, the lease payments on her sports utility vehicle. We added interest. The total sum demanded for immediate payment was $450,000. As Thorne predicted, their first reaction was confusion, then arrogant amusement. Mark, ever the manager, would assume it was a massive clerical error from a new, incompetent owner. He would try to handle it. His first call was to the old building manager, Mr. Henderson, the man who had always nodded and paid Brenda's bills. But Mr. Henderson's number was disconnected. As my first act as Mrs. Wallace, owner, I had authorized a generous severance package and an immediate, forced retirement for all of Arthur's complicit staff. Mark's second call was to the new building management office, located on the ground floor. The new manager, a crisp professional woman hired by Thorne, was prepared for his call. We had scripted her response. I imagined Mark's annoyed, confident tone. "Yes, this is Mark, in the penthouse. We've received a completely ridiculous bill here, sent by a Summit Ridge Properties. You need to fix this." The manager's voice would have been polite, flat, and cold. "I am sorry, sir. Who is calling?" "Mark, from the penthouse. Your tenant." "I am afraid I have no tenant on file by that name, sir. The penthouse unit is the private property of the building's owners. All billing inquiries must be directed to the legal department of Summit Ridge Properties." "But we are the owner's family." He must have sputtered. "Sir," the manager would have replied, her voice unwavering. "My records show only one owner, Summit Ridge Properties. Have a nice day." The bureaucratic wall was absolute. He had hit it at full speed. The panic would have set in when Brenda tried to go shopping. Perhaps she tried to buy a new pair of shoes to calm her nerves, or finalize that trip to Aspen. Her primary credit card, the one linked to the building's operating fund, would have been declined. She would have tried another, declined, and another, declined. Thorne had moved swiftly. The moment my identity as the sole beneficiary of Arthur's trust was legally affirmed, we had seized and frozen every account associated with my properties. The tap was off. The well was dry. They were trapped in a glass tower with no money and a $450,000 bill hanging over their heads. Then, the second notice arrived. This one was not an invoice. It was a formal legal demand. It stated that if the outstanding balance was not paid in full within 10 business days, Summit Ridge Properties would not only begin formal eviction proceedings for non-payment, but would also file a civil suit for recovery of the stolen funds. We made sure to use the word stolen. This, I knew, would push Mark to his final, desperate move. They had no cash. They had no credit. Their only remaining asset, in his mind, was the penthouse itself. He must have assumed, in his arrogance, that Arthur had left it to him in the will, that this was all just a nightmare of new ownership that could be cleared up by proving he owned the apartment. In a state of pure panic, he did exactly what we hoped. He walked into a downtown bank, perhaps the very same bank where I had stood shivering and applied for an emergency home equity loan to cover the mistaken bill. He sat in a small office, trying to explain to a loan officer that he owned the penthouse in the Parkview. The loan officer, a diligent woman, typed the address into her system. She frowned. She checked the county registrar's database. "I am sorry, sir," she said, looking confused. "There must be a mistake. Are you sure this is the correct address?" Of course I am sure, Mark would have insisted. "Well," the officer said, turning her screen toward him. "According to all public records, You do not own this property. There is no mortgage on it because it is owned outright. It is the wholly owned asset of a limited liability corporation, Summit Ridge Properties. He would have stared at the screen, the blood draining from his face. Sir, the loan officer continued, I cannot give you a loan against a property you do not own. According to the state of Colorado, you own nothing. The 10-day deadline we had given them was ticking down. Mark was a cornered animal, with no assets, no credit, and a massive lawsuit looming. His only remaining lifeline was his job. His 6-figure salary at Viridian Dynamics was his last shred of leverage, his only hope of securing any kind of personal loan to fight us. He must have been working frantically, trying to appear stable and indispensable at the one place that still paid him, all while his personal world was disintegrating. He will be desperate for money, I said to Thorne, looking down at the city from my suite. He will try to get a loan using his employment as collateral. Indeed, Thorne said. He was reviewing a different set of binders, the ones detailing my commercial office holdings. Which brings us to our next move. He slid a file across the table. Viridian Dynamics. It read. I raised an eyebrow. Mark's company. Not just his company, Thorne said, a faint smile playing on his lips. As of 2 weeks ago, when you signed the final transfer papers, they are your tenants. They lease 3 entire floors of the Adams-McKinnon Tower downtown. And, as fate would have it, their 10-year lease is up for renewal at the end of next month. I looked at the file. Arthur had truly seen everything. He had owned the building his own son worked in. The pieces clicked into place, not as a coincidence, but as the final, logical step in a meticulously planned game of chess. Schedule a meeting, I said, with the Chief Executive Officer, a formal discussion regarding the lease renewal for Summit Ridge Properties. The meeting was set for 2 days later. I dressed with surgical precision. I wore a dark charcoal suit of heavy silk, a single strand of pearls ones Arthur had given me, which I had retrieved from the storage unit, and my new, unforgiving glasses. When I walked into the Viridian Dynamics headquarters, I was no longer a mother visiting her son's office. I was the landlord. The CEO, a man named Harris, was all polished charm and false energy. He clearly had no idea who I was, assuming me to be a high-level functionary from the new ownership group. He ushered me into a vast corner office, offering coffee and platitudes. We are so thrilled to be discussing our future in the Adams-McKinnon Tower, he gushed, taking his seat. We find the location to be an integral part of our corporate identity. As do we, I said, my voice quiet and cool. I did not accept the coffee. I placed my leather-bound portfolio on the table. That is why Summit Ridge Properties is being so selective about our long-term partners. His smile faltered, just slightly. Selective. We own premier properties, Mr. Harris, I said, leaning forward. We expect the tenants who occupy our spaces to reflect our own values. We value stability, professionalism, a clean, respectable corporate image. Of course, he said, nodding quickly. Viridian is at the top of its game. Our fourth quarter projections are... I held up a hand, a small, simple gesture that cut him off mid-sentence. I am not speaking of your projections, Mr. Harris. I am speaking of your company's internal stability, the character of your employees, for instance. We believe a company's foundation is only as solid as the people it employs. We cannot abide instability, financial recklessness, distractions. It paints a poor picture." I let the words hang in the air. Harris's face had lost its tan. He was a smart man. He understood I was not talking about his balance sheets. He understood I was talking about something specific. "We are in the process of deciding," I continued, "whether to renew the lease for all 3 floors, or perhaps restructure. Break up the space for smaller, more stable tenants. It is a lot of square footage to entrust to one partner." That was the kill shot. The threat of losing their prime downtown headquarters, a move that would be catastrophic for their logistics and corporate image, was unthinkable. Harris began to sweat. "Mrs. Wallace," he said, his voice suddenly stripped of all its charm, "I assure you, Viridian Dynamics is the very model of stability. If there are any internal elements that do not meet your standards, I can promise you they will be reviewed. Immediately." "I am so glad to hear that," I said, standing up. "We value partners who are proactive in cleaning house." I left my business card on his desk. "We will await your decision." I did not have to wait long. 1 week later, Thorne received an inter-office memo forwarded from a contact inside Viridian's Human Resources Department. Mark was being terminated, effective immediately. The official reasons cited were departmental restructuring and ongoing unstable performance, a direct result of the extreme financial and personal stress we had inflicted. He had become a liability. I read the memo in my suite, then placed it neatly on the table. He now had no home. He had no money. He had no credit. And now, he had no job. The last support beam had been kicked out. Thorne's private investigator, who had been discreetly monitoring Brenda, reported that she had not returned to the penthouse for 2 days. She was not with Mark. She had been spotted having drinks at a hotel bar with a wealthy ex-boyfriend. She knew the ship was sinking, and the rats were the first to abandon it. The day the 10-day notice expired, I did not wait in my hotel suite. I rode the private elevator up to the penthouse. Elias Thorne was beside me, carrying a leather briefcase. When the doors opened, we stepped into chaos. 2 sheriff's deputies were already present, standing impassively by the foyer. Mark and Brenda were in the middle of the massive living room, frantically throwing designer clothes, electronics, and small sculptures into suitcases. They were surrounded by half-empty champagne bottles and the debris of their panic. They were screaming at each other. "This is your fault!" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking. She threw a high-heeled shoe into an open Louis Vuitton trunk. "Your weak, useless mother. You were supposed to handle her." "Me!" Mark roared back, his face a mottled, furious red. "You were the one who had to slap her. You were the one who could not stop spending. You just had to push it." The soft chime of the elevator cut through their argument. They both froze and turned. I stepped out onto the marble floor. I was not the woman they had thrown into a motel. I wore a dark grey suit. My silver hair was perfect, and my eyes were shielded by my new, sharp glasses. Mark's jaw dropped. He stared as if he was seeing a ghost. "Mom," he whispered. Brenda's face went from rage to confusion, and then to a horrifying, dawning realization. Her eyes narrowed to slits. "You," she hissed, the words dripping with venom. Summit Ridge Properties. It was you. It was all you." I looked around the room, at the mess they had made of my home. I let the silence stretch, thick and heavy. I looked directly at Brenda. Brenda, I said, my voice perfectly level, as cold and clear as the glass windows behind her. I thought I told you to enter your PIN. It seems you entered the wrong one. Mark stumbled forward, his hands outstretched in a pathetic gesture of appeal. Mum, what is this? You cannot do this. We are family. We were worried sick. Where have you been? The sheer audacity of the lie was almost impressive. I met his gaze, and for the first time in his life, I did not let him look away. Worried? I asked, my voice cutting through his plea. Were you worried? Mark, when you sat in that car and watched your wife strike me, were you worried when I called you, over and over, from that motel? Were you worried when you blocked my number and went to Aspen? I took one step closer, invading his space. You were right about one thing, my son. You said I needed my own space. I turned my head, gesturing to the entire penthouse, the skyline, the city that was mine. And this is my space. That broke Brenda. With a guttural scream of pure rage, she lunged at me. You old hag, I will kill you. She never got within 3 feet. Elias Thorne stepped directly in her path as the closest deputy grabbed her arms, pinning her easily. That is quite enough, ma'am, the deputy said calmly. I did not even flinch. I ignored her struggles and walked past them, my heels clicking on the marble. I went directly to the sleek, modern safe Brenda had installed in the wall, the one she used to hide her most expensive jewelry. What are you doing? Mark breathed, his voice trembling. I stood before the keypad. I entered 6 digits Arthur's birthday, a date I had cherished every year of our marriage, and a number Brenda would never have even thought to ask. The heavy steel door clicked and swung open. Brenda stopped struggling. She just stared, her mouth open in disbelief. Inside, nestled amongst her blood diamonds and gold, were my mother's locket and the pearl earrings Arthur had given me for our 20th anniversary, the ones she had stolen and sold, and then, apparently, bought back for herself with my money. I reached in and carefully removed my jewelry. I also took out a single, folded document. I turned and walked back to Mark. I held out my hand. In my palm lay the antique locket and the pearls. Here, I said, is the invoice for the items your wife stole from me. I closed my fist around them. And I am considering it paid. I then handed him the folded document from the safe. This, however, is a restraining order. For both of you. If you or she ever attempt to contact me, my associates, or my properties again, I will have you prosecuted for every crime you have committed, from assault to embezzlement. I turned away from my son's completely broken face and addressed the senior deputy. Officer, I said, please remove these people from my property. They are trespassing. I did not watch them being hauled out. I did not watch as the deputies informed them they could take 1 suitcase each, and the rest would be impounded. Instead, I walked to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. Thorne quietly arranged for a cup of tea to be brought to me. I stood there, sipping the hot, strong Earl Grey, and I looked down. Far below, the deputies escorted Mark and Brenda out of the building and onto the sidewalk. I watched as they stood, dazed, surrounded by their single suitcases, on the exact same stretch of cold pavement where Brenda had slapped me and my son had turned his back. I did not smile. I did not cry. I just felt settled. The books, after all, were finally balanced. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I truly appreciate you being here. I am always curious where my stories land. So please, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, give this video a like, and hit that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.